This is Shannon Perry, and this is the Audiotocracy Podcast. As I record this, it's Memorial Day here in the United States, a day dedicated to remembering those who lost their lives in military service. I think one way to honor fallen soldiers is by helping veterans who are dealing with post-traumatic stress and military sexual trauma as a result of their time in service. Aaron Phillips served 6.5 years in the United States Marine Corps during the First Gulf War, deploying to the Persian Gulf. He came to the Warrior Connection, the organization where he is now executive director, as a participant suffering from PTSD. The story of how he got to TWC is incredible and included here. He stayed at TWC because he believes everyone deserves to be whole and healthy, so he's putting his degree in behavioral science and his many other skills to use, helping veterans heal. Please listen, then consider making a donation to the Warrior Connection. And for those who suffer PTSD or sexual trauma, please be aware there is some frank discussion here that may be triggering. If you feel you're in any danger, the suicide hotline in the United States is 1-800-273-8255. Please seek help. You matter. So welcome and thanks for joining me here today.
Oh, absolutely, Shannon. It's a pleasure to be with you. I have to admit, this project's been on my calendar for a little bit of time, and it wasn't until yesterday when I refreshed my memory on the topics, and I was just so excited to have some time with you today. So thanks for making yourself available.
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited that we're going to get to share this with the listening people. So
indeed,
exciting stuff. All right. So the Warrior Connection is a program to help veterans recover from PTSD and MST, or military sexual trauma. Mm-hmm. Can you first give us a definition of both of those terms?
Sure. Well, let's start with the easiest. So military sexual trauma is no different than any other sexual trauma that would happen to anyone else. The difference is it happened while they were serving and while they were in uniform. So that just refers to sexual assault or harassment that was experienced during military service. So that can include any type of sexual activity that you were involved with, that one was involved with, that is against their will. So again, harassment as well as sexual assault. Post-traumatic stress, probably the one most of your listeners are most familiar with, right? PTS. And then, of course, when it becomes a disorder, we add that D. So the governing body of psychology is the DSM-5, which really defines PTS typically as the result of direct exposure or the witnessing of life-threatening traumatic events. And symptoms that often coincide with those traumatic events include repeated intrusive thoughts, flashbacks as if the event is happening again. And then, of course, the additional emotional distress that continues as a part of a normal cycle of a traumatic event, but it continues past 30 days. Typically, as we say, all things get better with time. The issue with post-traumatic stress is that despite time, we're not finding a way to heal.
So people can suffer from it continuously, intermittently for years.
That's
after
true.
The event.
Yeah, typically it's a bit cyclical, right? There's a chronic state of stress, and what we know is when we stay in a chronic state of stress, typically it peaks into acute stress and becomes much more dangerous for the individual that's experiencing it for a variety of reasons, which I'm sure we'll probably chat about as we go through.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the potential dangers of leaving these conditions untreated?
Yes, well, I think we're probably all relatively familiar with some of the numbers and statistics as it relates to post-traumatic stress as we think about military veterans. And of course, military sexual trauma has been in the headlines for quite some time. I remember as a young child, the tailhook scandal in the Navy Academy. And unfortunately, some of those things are still prevalent. And quite frankly, it's not just a military problem. It is a societal and a cultural problem that prevails in our country specifically. And so really the potential dangers here, again, it's cyclical. So what we typically see when someone who is in that chronic stressed state for a long period of time, they'll often find acute states of stress where it gets much more intense, where typically the cycle kind of follows a withdrawal from normal activities. So whatever their daily routine is begins to change, and they begin to pull away from doing those things, interacting with people, getting away from their normal life. It's usually coupled by anxiety, and of course, anxiety is fear. It's the hand wringing of the future, right? I'm worried about what hasn't happened yet, right, or what could happen. And typically, with that fear, is uncomfortable. So then, folks usually resort to self-medication, and that can be a variety of things. That can be drugs and alcohol. That can be pornography. That can be exercise where you work out too much, right? It can be a variety of things. But often when that self-medication sets in, we're trying to avoid, we're trying to numb those uncomfortable feelings. What typically happens after that is a period of isolation. That only works for a finite period of time. And then we begin to wall off even more. And as we wall off, well, people, we're pack animals. So we're not designed to be alone and be walled off. So what typically accompanies those walls is depression. And of course, with depression at worst becomes hopelessness. And hopelessness can ultimately result in a permanent solution to a temporary problem in suicide.
Right. Oh, so sad, so incredibly sad. And of course, life doesn't become unstressful once you're out of uniform.
Sure.
So does it become a problem of people having everyday stresses that then become triggers for greater stress because of the disorder?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's no real easy answer. There's no one specific thing. There's no one lever we can pull, one button we can push. But what we know about those stressors is there's ebbs and flows, times of year, specific events that happened, remembering or somebody else's trauma that they're talking about takes us back to a time when we felt similar. When someone relays a story to us, regardless of the topic, we make a choice. We're either agreeing with that person in their story or we're disagreeing, right? So as a person tells us a story, we begin to co-regulate with that person. So if that person's in a state of stress and we are susceptible to likewise that same stressors, right, or same traumatic events, we begin to co-regulate with that person. And now because their elevated stress levels, well, now our stress levels become elevated, especially in those that may not have the tools yet. They may not yet have the tools to work on that self-regulation, to build that coherence, that state of balance within themselves. They're much more susceptible to somebody else in a higher stress level, right?
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. So that brings the whole question of when people are volunteering to help someone recover, then they have to, if they've been in a similar situation, if they've recovered from something similar, they need tools to be able to keep themselves, their own stress levels managed in order to be effective helping someone else.
Oh, absolutely, Shannon. Absolutely. What I would tell you is this: like heals like, right? So it's almost impossible for us to lead someone down a road that we've never been. And so it takes someone with some training and some tools and, experience, wisdom, if you will. And of course, we all know where wisdom comes from. Well, wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from making poor choices that didn't work out well, that typically we learn from.
Right. Wow. Okay, great. Yeah, I will want to get into that a little bit further on, but this is fascinating and certainly information I was not aware of. So thank you. Many of us associate PTSD with people in uniform in particular.
Sure.
So what sorts of experiences are our soldiers going through that can cause clinical trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would tell you, post-traumatic stress is a normal response to traumatic events. None of us, the human condition, we are susceptible to trauma, and we've all experienced it. Some greater scales than others, and quite frankly, it is all relative. Some things that may really bother me might not bother you based on your own lived experience, right? So it's just really important that folks understand that post-traumatic stress is a normal occurrence. That is part of the cycle. To give an example, when your dog's walking down the street, you're walking your dog on a leash, and there's another dog that comes close and they bark at each other, right? They have a negative interaction. Well, as the dog walks away, he's kind of checking, make sure he's safe. And then typically, what does that dog do? They give a good shake. All right, I got to shake it off.
Right.
I mean, they're literally shaking it off, right? That is an autonomic nervous system response to stress, right? So that shaking of it off. And our bodies are built to do the same thing with stress. It takes a little bit of time based on the stressor, based on the amount of time in stress, and based on the severity. So again, for our folks in uniform, to answer your question a little bit more directly, direct exposure to life-threatening events or witnessing life-threatening events. What happens is that with those events is oftentimes for those in uniform, I'll use myself as an example. In a traumatic event, I didn't have time to work through the emotions that I was dealing with due to the loss of a buddy. Because in those moments, the mission needed to continue, right? We had to stay on task. Yes, we had to care for our wounded and evacuate medical injuries and etc. But the rest of us were still on the ground in the fight, if you will. And so as for most veterans, in those situations, we don't have time to process those emotions. And quite frankly, most of the time, folks that are affected by cycles of post-traumatic stress, even depression or anxiety, this all links back to usually other issues in childhood, in development ages, where there may have been cycles of abuse, neglect, resulting in similar cycles of withdrawal from normal activity. So the pattern becomes familiar to us at an early age. And at an early age, we didn't have the tools, likely, and we probably didn't even have the coaching because we couldn't express the emotion. So no one knew necessarily what we needed, right? So when those that have been exposed to trauma have similar experiences later in life, in the military or otherwise, we tend to fall back into those same patterns. They become ingrained, if you will. They become comfortable. And this is true for the victims of domestic violence or violent crime or any other sexual assault. After all, like I say, we're creatures of habit, right? So the thing about PTS is that it can happen to anyone. And it's really important that the listeners understand that that's not a sign of weakness. This is something that veterans grapple with for a good long time because depending on your training, right? I'll use myself again as an example because I don't like to speak for veterans per se. I can share my experiences, right? But for many veterans, admitting you needed some help in your training, right, or in the military in general, often was like, well, gee, I can't help you. I got to carry my own pack and my own stuff and my own extra batteries and my own helmet and my own armor. I can't carry yours too, right? So it becomes this cycle where, well, I'll just tough it out then. Yeah, well, I'm hurt and maybe I'm a little bit injured, but I got to keep moving because I can't give my pack to somebody else. I can't hand somebody else my rifle, right? So that cycle, again, only perpetuates the stereotype of, well, I can't ask for help or I shouldn't get help even though I'm struggling. And so, of course, factors that increase the chances of folks that may experience post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Most of those instances are kind of out of our control. Like we can't control those events and those surroundings. For example, having a very intense or long-lasting traumatic event, getting injured during an event can make it more likely that a person will develop post-traumatic stress disorder, right? In the long run. And of course, post-traumatic stress disorder is much more common after certain types of trauma, like combat or a major car accident or sexual assault, right? Personal factors like that and previous traumatic exposure, age, gender also play a role in how that person develops and what coping strategies, whether negative or positive, what coping strategies do they find that helps to ease? And, the stress that makes PTSD more likely, and of course there is a lot of social support, pack animals, that's often what helps. And that's a big reason why the name connection, the word connection is in our name, because that social connection is such a huge part of the healing energy and the healing process for folks with stress. And what we've learned of late is that, the brain is placid, right? That means it's pliable, it's malleable. So these familiar patterns of stress and how we cope with them, they can be redirected, right? Think of it like a river. And we need to feed a new town, and we need to allow to water their agriculture, right? So man-made, right? We might divert that water to now feed that town, and that's exactly what we do with post-traumatic stress, and exactly what large components of our program at TWC is focused on.
Great. And there's a question I'm going to want to ask you later, but I'm going to ask it now so that neither of us forgets. Knowing that PTS certainly, and then also developing into the disorder is relatively common among veterans, or certainly more common than it is among the civilian population. Good grief, the civilian population as a whole. Does the Army have some sort of training to help people in advance of those situations? Does it work? And do you have wisdom that you could share with them on that end of the process?
Well, I tend to use simplistic metaphors just so that I can understand them. But so a couple parts to your question there I think that are important. So does the military, are they aware of this stress disorder, how it's caused, and how we may be able to mitigate it? I think short answer there is no. I think there's plenty of people that would argue that theory with me, but I'll use, again, my own experience. So in the Marine Corps, we had what was called stress inoculation training, right? That sounds good. I can get inoculated from stress?
Can
really?
I get that?
Well, and so what stress inoculation training was basically putting you into very stressful situations. And there is a component of that, especially when you have really ingrained training, how you react to a gunshot. Whoa, right? What do you do? So we want to regulate that autonomic nervous system response, that flight, fight, or freeze, right? So we want to create a process where fight becomes the response. If a shot cracks off and our first instinct is to run away, well, we're probably not going to win too many fights, right? On a battlefield anyway. Likewise, freeze, right? So shot cracks and you freeze. Well, guess what? The enemy is going to get a second shot at you real quick. So we want to ingrain that fight instinct. Boom, shot cracks. Orient, observe, decide, take action, and then move, right? So similarly, we thought in the military that if we just simply exposed people to these super stressful events, then when super stressful events happen, you'd know how to deal. Well, what we actually proved to be true is when you repeatedly expose people to stressful events, guess what? You trigger that stress response, and it could trigger even, post-traumatic stress disorder. So we were now that's a learning curve, right? So, again, wisdom comes from experience, and experience those bad decisions. So there is truth to building that muscle, right? Just like, physical exercise, there is truth to building that muscle. And yet it is different when you're in training and you're probably not actually going to die, right? Right. They're not actually going to shoot me. I know they're not actually blowing up rocket-propelled grenades next to me, right? These are controlled demolitions. So it's still dangerous, but it's not the same as when real-life situations occur and your buddy literally gets blown up, right? So I would say that we've gotten smarter about how we train stress inoculation training. It's no longer called that. There's many different versions and variations now, but our top tier military units, so folks would recognize things like the Navy SEALs or Delta Force, Green Berets, etc. Olympic athletes, professional athletes, they work on this model of resilience building, much like physical exercise. You've got to use and train a muscle in order for it to get stronger. So it's not training yourself for stress. It's training yourself how to regulate during stress, right? A lot of that is that autonomic nervous system, right? The only thing you can really control in your stress response, you can't control your heart rate, but you can control your breathing. And your breathing helps control your heart rate. And your heart rate helps control the flow of blood and oxygen through the body and all the hormones that go coursing, right? So when you get that adrenaline dump, if your heart race is out of control, then you get that super nervous energy that you're having a hard time sitting still.
Right.
And likewise, if you can regulate, you'll get that adrenaline dump, but now you can regulate your breathing and get into a familiar breath pattern, that muscle of working through stress that happens outside of stressful situations. That resiliency has to be built outside of stress. So that is the muscle that becomes familiar in stress, right? Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It does. Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to skip a few questions and go to the warrior connection, but we'll come back to some of these.
Yeah, sure.
But I want to talk a little bit about what is the warrior connection and what do you do and how do you help?
So, the long and the short is the Warrior Connection provides residential retreat services to our military veterans and families to help heal the invisible wounds that occurred while in uniform. We specialize in programs for military men, women, and military spouses. Those programs are run separately. All of our programs, aside from a small commitment fee from the participant, are free. We provide travel from all 50 states, full accommodations, including 12 months of follow-up care in our program. And our goal is to really help break the cycle of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'll call it rehabilitation. It is a continual process, right? You don't get fixed from post-traumatic stress. You learn how to manage it, right? And it takes effort, much like that stress breathing that I was talking about. You've got to learn to use it when you're not in stress so that when stress does come in life and you are predisposed to the disorder side of post-traumatic stress, you know, it's kind of like the game is up at that point. You're like, oh, I'm doing that thing again. I'm doing that thing where my brain is telling me the story that it's never going to get better and I have no hope. Aha, I know how to work through this now, right? So that's the goal. Our programs use about 7 proven, I'll say, holistic modalities. The VA would say we are non-traditional healing modalities, right? So that's things like individual coaching and group coaching. And group coaching is different than group therapy, right? Mm-hmm. Think about therapy. I want to tell you my problems and you're going to listen and you're going to empathize, right? But coaching is different. Think about some of the best coaches of all time, right? You know, a Vince Lombardi on the sidelines in the NFL. He was a very animated coach. I'm coaching you, right? Run faster, jump higher, catch that, right? So coaching is different than counseling. And so when like heals like, veteran to veteran. So a guy like me to a guy similar to me, or a female vet similar to a female vet like herself. That individual mentoring, that group coaching works a lot better, right? Mm-hmm. Additionally, we incorporate really cool tools, some biofeedback technology, as long as some specific techniques. Mindfulness and activities in nature play a huge role. Reconnecting to nature is vital, especially for folks who have withdrawn into isolation, right? Mm-hmm. We definitely use mindfulness and trauma-sensitive exercise all as healing components. And then, there's some secret sauce as well. And what I would tell you is that the community coming in to our program, being a part of our program, providing for our program and our participants plays a huge role. It really can't be understated. When we think back to, Native Americans, when they had cultural classes, tribal clashes, the men would go off to fight typically, right? And as a part of going off to battle, when they returned, they often did not return directly into their tribe. They were held apart for a time, and the tribe came to them, literally hand feeding them, bathing them, nurturing them, caring for them, holding them in a space until they were ready to come back into the tribe. And so that's an interesting part of the healing program that TWC provides. Likewise, it's been my experience that, especially since the Vietnam War, veterans tend to set themselves apart from civilians. If we think back just historically, right? World War I, some 40% of our nation served. World War II, even higher numbers, because everyone was serving, not just those going off to fight, but everyone left behind was working in steel mills and helping recycle iron and canning food and bandages and and all the things and buying bonds and right, like, so everybody was helping to support those warriors. And since, World War I, World War II, those numbers dramatically decreased, right? Now we're to a point in society where less than 1% of our population serves, right? So it's no mystery that veterans come home feeling different and society comes home disconnected from, well, I see that there's a problem, but I'm not sure how I can help. And, oh, gee, that person may be struggling. So I don't want to rock the boat, right? I don't know what to do, but I also don't know what not to do. So therefore, I'll do nothing, right? I'll send thoughts and prayers. And what we know is that's not enough. So I hope that answers your question about what we do and a little bit of the secret sauce mixed in.
It does. When a veteran goes to one of your retreats, like what kind of thing, what does a typical day look like, if there is such a thing as a typical day?
A typical day. Yeah. So it's a bit of a process, I must admit. And we don't share the complete recipe for what it is we do to make the magical soup. And really, that's mostly because, much like serving overseas or going into combat, walking in the willingness to walk into the fear of the unknown with a small group of people, that is in and of itself part of our process.
That makes sense.
I'll tell you, it's just a quick fun story. So I came to the Warrior Connection as a participant. That's how I found this work. And back then, our program was much smaller, probably serving a dozen, maybe 18 veterans a year, right? That's not to take away from serving a dozen to 18 veterans a year. Those lives are precious, right? But we find ourselves now having 10 times increased that number, where we're serving over 150 veterans a year, plus military spouses. So that's part of, I think, my contribution to the agency is to help grow this work. That's really our goal. But I digress. On my way to TWC as a participant, I had to buy my own airfare, plan my own trip. So I was essentially on my own. On my flight, I was given a phone number to call once I got to the airport, and literally some guy in a pickup truck picked me up. There was one other veteran that was coming, and we were going to meet at the airport. Other veteran and I had not talked in advance, so we didn't know one another. So there's that sniffing out that happens between veterans. Well, who are you? And where did you serve? And what did you do? And, can I trust you, right? So I'm already feeling that when I meet with this veteran. Now I get this other stranger who I don't know, who I've literally flown across country from California to Vermont. So I know like no one in Vermont. Because, first of all, there's only like 4 people in Vermont. So, right. So here I am with this new friend and then this stranger who's going to drive me to this place. And our flights didn't come in until 10:50 at night. So it's pitch black, right? And we got an hour and 40-minute ride to the retreat center, and it's pitch black. And about 45 minutes to an hour into this ride, we take a turn onto a dirt road. Like, we're out in the middle of the sticks. So
Did you start hearing banjos?
Seriously. Yeah, seriously. We made plenty of the joke about it, Anthony and I. So much so that, like, I looked at him and was like, hey man, look, I don't know where we're going. I don't know what we're doing, but if anything goes south with this guy, I got your back. You better get mine. And he was like, oh yeah, I got you. And I was like, all right, good. Then whatever happens, we'll figure it out. Right. So a lot has changed. A lot has changed since then. We link the groups in advance, and our participants meet their mentor in advance. They're connected to the facilitators. They know who's picking them up at the airport. But anyway, a fun story of, that's helped inform some change to our program, right? And
Absolutely.
folks like me that may have been willing to take those first steps, well, think about other folks that are in more acute stages of stress. Well, are they going to be willing to book their own flight, travel cross country to meet some guy they don't know and get in a truck in the middle of the night? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
So all of that to say, what is a typical day at TWC? Um, so for our retreat programs, again, we work through those different modalities that I mentioned, that group coaching, the individual coaching, that informed trauma sensitive exercise, mindfulness, the use of expressive arts, our biofeedback tools. All that is baked into the cake at different times throughout the program.
Sure.
What I would tell you is this: we use a 10-station map, right? Much like military planning. There's a plan. You've got a map. You've got waypoints. You've got to hit these targets, and you've got to check in and do certain things at each point. Change your socks, eat some food, reload, clean your weapon, etc. So we do all those things along the way. That process begins really with who were we before our traumatic events? Where were we in life? Right?
Right.
What were those experiences?
Are you kind of redefining a familiar map so that those things that might have been trigger points are now comforting or
Yeah.
familiar in a different way?
Yeah, I like what you said there. So our goal, if we do it right, first of all, I'll tell you that our facilitators, having been a facilitator and still working as a facilitator within our programs, it's tough because like a coach, you want to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this interesting dichotomy that happens as a facilitator. Being a good facilitator teeters on being a good coach. And being a good coach teeters on being a good mentor, showing the way, not just talking about it, but showing it. And being a good mentor teeters on being a good friend, right? But in order to be a good friend, you got to be a good person. So these things are all kind of layered into the cake. And the challenge, at least for our facilitators, is as much as we may want for someone's healing, that's not our job, right? Our job is to try to show, share, and encourage the process and allow that person to do their healing work. So again, I'll allude to there is a recipe, right? It's very specific. It's a very specific path that we walk because to answer your question, you're correct. We're looking to take those things, those traumatic events, those dark spaces in our hearts and minds that literally push us into the corner, right? We want to help the veteran or the participant reframe those experiences in such a way that it allows for them to pull themselves into the light, right? That is the best intended outcome of our program.
Right. It seems like having then veterans as facilitators, people who have been through the experience, that you're modeling hope. Like here are people who have been there and are now managing it, and that even if you never say it out loud, that's got to be a huge thing for people just to see.
Yeah, so we use a couple things. We use that 10-station map, right? So people know where we're going. It's not a surprise. Now they don't know the path between the stations, but they know what's coming. They can anticipate a little bit. That's important, right? The second thing we use is a code of conduct. So before a veteran even comes to our program, we share our code of conduct. Hey, listen, are you willing to take and abide by this oath, which is very similar to the oath that we swore into service, right? And as we raised our right hand to support, protect, and defend the Constitution, our oath did not have an expiration date. It didn't say, I will do it for the duration of my commission, or I will do it for the duration of my enlistment. It said, I will do it, right? So we use that same type of commitment, that same type of oath, and we coach to that. So I'll give you an example. One of the most important points in our code of conduct is a statement, I will never quit, right? So when this program gets hard, when it emotionally is challenging, draining, exhausting, and a person says, that's it, I'm done, I want to go home, I don't want to do this shit anymore, we come back to that code of conduct. Hold on a second. I hear you. It is tough. It is cold. It is dark. It is lonely. You are hungry and you're wet and you're tired. And you will never quit, right? And so we coach to things like that. Another one that we often find ourselves coaching to is listening and speaking from our heart. Now that's a lot different for folks that especially are in a chronic state or acute state of stress, right? Because especially in today's society, right, we've seen the last 15 months have been oh so polarizing in this country for a number of reasons, right? Where people aren't listening to one another. They don't want to hear the other side because they just want to reinforce their argument and get you to either agree or leave this country, right? Right. Those are kind of the extremes that we're seeing. And so we coach to our program that listening from the heart. And then when it gets challenging or you want to tell someone, well, listen, I don't understand. Why don't you just stop freaking drinking and then you wouldn't have such a problem? Well, hold on. That may be a valid point, but are you speaking from your heart there? You're not in that person's shoes, because another point of our code of conduct is acceptance for myself and my process, as well as acceptance for others and theirs. So as much as, like I said, facilitators may want that healing, we may see the elephant in the room, but that person's still not ready to grapple it yet. Well, okay, that's okay. We're just going to have to trust their process. We'll help them keep leading that elephant along the way, hopefully, but they got to get ready to wrestle it on their own.
Wow, so powerful. That is so powerful.
You know, Shannon, as I think about it, probably a way that maybe this can help the listeners, right? Because maybe this, it sounds a little woo-woo to some, right? Well, I don't know how that works. That doesn't make sense to me. The example I like to use is, I had a compound fracture of my leg. That means bones out of place, right? Bad news. A compound fracture will not get better on its own. Full stop. It needs medical intervention, right? We all get that. Those bones literally need to be pulled apart and reset. Without being reset, without being fixed, I'd probably be maimed for life, right? I would not be a CrossFit athlete or going out to a Spartan race, because physically I would just not be able to compete, or at least the way that I would envision. So medical intervention is necessary, right? But once the bones are set and once that cast is on, who does the healing? Not the doctor.
Right.
The body heals itself. The body knows how to heal itself. So we think about the warrior connection in some ways like a medical intervention. We're not going to heal. We're going to set the conditions such that you can quite literally heal yourself, because wounds heal from the inside. Right. They heal from the inside.
Right. And I can see how saying that to someone could be both empowering and daunting if you are not feeling healthy enough within yourself to feel like you can do that healing. Yeah. Then that would be, but then you provide them a place where you can set them up to succeed.
Well, that's a good point, Shannon. I'm super excited. We're about to turn the calendar to June here. Holy cow, we're turning the calendar to June. First of all. But in June, TWC is going to get back to offering retreats again, something we haven't done for 18 months. Since October of 2019 was our last retreat program. And normally we would have kick-started this spring in 2020 and gotten back to work doing what we love doing. And of course, with all that's happening in the world, we weren't able to do that. So here we are in June of 2021. We've got a tremendous group of participants ready to come participate in our program. Well, to your point, that daunting, how do I do this, right? Almost all of the guys coming to our first men's retreat, we've been talking to for years. 2, 3, 4 years.
Really?
Now they're ready. That's typical for our retreat program. It's usually when folks are kind of at the end of their rope, when they're like, okay. I mean, we've got multiple folks that have come through our program that have said, look, I might as well come, because if this doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might be done, right? I'm probably getting ready to quit, so I hope this works, right? Many of our participants are in that state, whereas many others have been dealing with issues for years, for decades even. As the Warrior Connection got started, primarily it was focused on Vietnam veterans. So these are guys and gals that have been struggling for decades, 20, 30, 40 years of carrying this stuff. And they've survived this long, right? And of course, we know the statistics around veteran suicide and et cetera. And that's amazing that they've made it this far. And yet, they deserve some relief. They deserve some hope. And at TWC, we believe that veterans specifically deserve every chance at their brightest future.
Absolutely. So what changes do you see in veterans before, during, and after?
Oh, gosh. Oh, Shannon.
Big question, I know.
Big question, but even bigger answers, honestly. It is the equivalent of turning on a light in the middle of the night. I mean, we see guys and gals come into our program that day one cannot make eye contact for, more than a quick flash, because they're just, they'll check in. Yep, I'm here. Thanks. Because again, they're still in that super acute stress. They want to avoid, they want to isolate, they want to numb uncomfortable feelings. So if you want to talk to me and actually see me eyeball to eyeball, kneecap to kneecap, well, that's uncomfortable for me because inside I'm not feeling comfortable in myself. So the hats are down low. The body language is this, we get a lot of this the first few days. Right. But again, that 10 stations, usually by about Wednesday of the week, the middle point of the week is kind of a turning point. We call it the pop. Because quite literally that's what happens. They begin to trust the group. They begin to trust what's coming up in them, and then they begin to share that with the group. And then that process, that warrior's journey that we provide, helps them feel more comfortable, more confident in themselves, in each other, in the process that the Warrior Connection is providing, such that this becomes okay. Well, here's what's next for me. I want to talk, right? And it begins to flow. So hopefully we find that around that halfway point, but there's several other points along the way that I can share. One of which is probably the most powerful station. It's station 6, and it's all about forgiveness. And when we think about those traumatic events, take combat, for example, the loss of a buddy is typically one of the worst for folks to deal with, especially if, let's say, you were the medic in that unit and you lost one of your guys. You couldn't save him, right? There's all sorts of psychological guilt, blame, shame dynamic that goes into all those things, those feelings, right?
Can't even imagine.
So when we start talking about forgiveness, we're on that path of healing. We have to think about, who do we need to forgive that hurt us? That could be as big as forgiving the enemy, right? That's huge. Yeah. And I'll tell you, veterans who've been in combat will tell you they respect their enemy because they know the costs, right? And often those that send folks to war do a lot of rhetoric about it, but those that actually fight will tell you, we may have won the battles, but there's really no true winners in war. The organic cost, the emotional cost, right? So we have to think about, who do we need to forgive? And often that starts with ourselves. The things that we've done to ourselves as a result. We lost a buddy. We know it wasn't our fault, but now we've committed to this life or path of destruction. I'll, again, use myself as an example. I can look back at my time before the Warrior Connection and see the wake of scorched earth in broken, damaged relationships, not just emotional hurts, but physical hurts. I've done some things and lashed out at some people in silly situations and bar fights and the grocery store, etc. And it's part of what brought me to TWC is I found myself in a road rage incident in 2014, embarrassingly, where I was yanking a man my father's age out of his car on the side of a freeway on-ramp. And thankfully, his seatbelt was engaged. So I couldn't get him out of the damn car. And in those nanoseconds, I kid you not, Shannon, I saw my life changing in 3 ways, and none of them were for the better. The first is I saw myself breaking my promise to be a good dad. That's different than being a father, we know, right? Mm-hmm. That was number 1. I saw myself breaking that promise to him. Number 2, I saw myself looking out behind steel bars, right? That's not the life I wanted, nor do I think I deserve. Mm-hmm. And number 3 is I saw this man's family getting notified that their loved one may or may not be coming home. And that scared the shit out of me, right? Because I don't want to be that person in our society. And I had that flash all at once had me stuffing him back in his car, holding his door closed, pleading with him to just drive away, right? Please just drive away. And thankfully he did. And nothing legally or physically came as a result of that, right? Because even that incident could have resulted in me wearing some nice shiny silver bracelets, right? And thankfully it didn't. But that was the moment where I said, okay, I got to admit that I need some help now, right? There had been flashing red signs. I remember my executive vice president of human resources for a Fortune 100 company coming to visit me at work and saying, God, you're such an awesome this, that, and the other, and you're doing such a great job. We love your work. But you do know you can't physically accost employees and customers, right? You can stop doing that, right? Right. So that was part of my journey. I mean, there were all those signs and broken relationships and et cetera along the way. But for me, that forgiveness station, right? That was probably one of the most important. Beginning to forgive me and really, truly being able to forgive others. And that's a process, right? That I continue to practice, that self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others. And it goes right back to that code of conduct, that acceptance for self and my journey, as well as others and their process.
Wow. Okay. Sorry, tearing up a little bit over here.
It's just allergies. I get them sometimes too. You should see me at retreat graduations, for crying out loud.
They're just full of pollen, clearly. Wow. How do you continue to support these folks outside of the retreats? What happens after?
Yeah, thanks for asking. You know, as I came to TWC, the program was much different. You know, along the way, part of the beauty of our program is that each of the folks that have come to the agency have contributed and helped inform our work along the way. And for me, as I came to TWC some 6+ years ago, I think now, it was kind of a catch and release program, right? You know, veterans had to provide their own travel and travel cross country and et cetera. And so it was kind of like, all right, congratulations. And then I go home. Well, now what? Right. So our program now includes 12 months of follow-up. I want to be clear. We're not a 24/7 service, right? Our program is an intervention model, similar to rehab, right? You go, you learn some new tools, you get a chance to break some cycles, some habits maybe, and learn new ones to replace them with. But then you do go home. So you know, we really view the Warrior Connection and the work that we do as a piece of the healing equation, right? And so we return our folks home with a solid safety plan, with we'll call it a fire team of support. You know, the smallest unit in a Marine Corps is a fire team. That's usually between 4 to 6 people. So we want to make sure that veteran goes home with a solid core of 4 to 6 people that can hold them accountable, can help be a coach with them in their own life, right? Which is different than, say, a family member or even some therapists, because those folks often become habituated to the behavior and the cycle. So then we just, oh, geez, having a rough day. So, right. But okay, but how do we fix it? How do we, to your point earlier, how do we help? So we send the veteran home with that fire team in place. We send them home with a completed safety plan, both environmental and emotional safety plan of How are they going to help keep building their resilience, right? Help keep building their own coherence. And then, of course, they have an action plan. Our program is based on the concept of 6 pillars of our life, right? So 6 pillars of well-being. And what that means for folks is our physical well-being, right? So our physical body, exercise, sleep, what we're putting in as far as diet and exercise. Our mental health. So how are we doing to keep our mental health fitness, right? So physical health, mental health, relationships. How are we building relationships in our personal life, right? We think about those veterans that do find themselves in those chronic states and they isolate. Well, what happens to relationships when you isolate? The phone stops ringing because you stop answering. So people stop calling because you don't answer. And the cycle continues, right? So how can you proactively build those relationships? And then career and finances, which often go hand in hand, right? We know that finances tend to be one of the 3 major things that when those get bad, it gets dark, right? Those behaviors, those cycles of I can go back into my dark corner, right? Along with relationships, that's one of the other 3, right? And then substances, right? The abuse of substances. Those 3 things are kind of the 3-legged stool that if you lose one of them, it's probably bad news. So we bake that into the cake. So finances, a career, and career is different. Career doesn't mean job, right? A job is something you do for a paycheck. A career is something you invest in that pays you back. And so that can be volunteer work. That can be work with your children or a school in the community. It can be a variety of things, but it's something you invest in that pays you back in some way, right? Because often one of the bigger points of disconnection is our veterans that served, specifically those that served for longer periods or career folks in the military. No matter who you were in the military, you had a boss who told you where to be, what to take with you, what to wear when you got there, what to do, and then what to do when you were done every day. And so when a veteran leaves service without that structure, we can sometimes get lost. We don't have a mission. We don't have a purpose. So that career is important. It's vital. And then last but not least is a sense of spirituality. Those are our 6 pillars of well-being. And spirituality does not mean religion, although it certainly can for some, right? But spirituality really means truly that connection to the sense of greater than the self, right? So that's in big part why we incorporate the community and why we incorporate nature into the programs that we provide. So all of that to say, as we send a veteran home with their fire team, with their safety plan, with their action plan, then we also connect them to local resources. Usually it's a vet center, which is a part of the VA system, but it is very separate from VA healthcare. And these vet centers are very much in alignment with the same, well, at least 5 of our 6 pillars. They're very much in alignment with helping veterans get better, building relationships, connection to their community, to career and volunteer opportunities, things like that. So that is all part of what we bake into the cake. And then additionally, we do check-ins from our mentors, our facilitators, and then the group, right? So a kind of a 30, 60, 90-day short term while we're making sure folks are stable, right? But also that they're implementing their plans, both their safety plans and their action plans. And then we connect them to those local resources and we share those safety plans, those action plans with those folks in their inner circle so that their community is involved and their community is accountable to making sure that their safety plan is working, making sure that their action plan is being worked on. And if it's not, then, again, there's the difference between a coach and someone who may not hold them, I'll say, accountable. Accountability is tough, right? Accountability starts with the self.
Right.
But that's also where spirituality plays that role. Spirituality plays a huge role in self-accountability, right? Sure. And that's often where those lines of spirituality and religion can get a little blurry, but that's okay. We're accepting of all walks and all faiths, and so it usually tends to line up pretty well. Our program culminates after that that 90-day mark, then there's just usually some individual follow-up that's done, right? We're comfortable now. They're connected with their vet center. They're making progress. Those check-ins become a little bit more fewer and farther between. And then each year we have an annual reunion where we bring folks back.
Nice.
So all of the graduating class from the previous year gets a chance to come back. Our last reunion that we held in 2019 brought, I think, 74 folks back together from across the country, and some had attended in the last couple, 2-3 years, right? So we're really looking forward to continue to grow that as well.
Wow, that is fantastic. So if we could talk about military sexual trauma for a moment. So obviously both men and women experience post-traumatic stress and military sexual trauma.
Sure.
Obviously with female veterans, it's more common. How do you help these survivors, and how is the approach different, the same? How does that work?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And, what I would share is this. So our program is designed to really get reconnected to who we are emotionally, right? There becomes a detachment from emotion. Specifically, combat veterans can tell you there's a bit of dehumanization that comes with being in combat, and often it's shared that, especially while we're serving in combat zone, everyone else that is not with us becomes an obstacle to us getting home. And obviously that's a very slippery slope for a lot of reasons, right? And as we get into our programs, veterans, when they build that trust, begin to share, and it's so much less about the what that happened and so much more about how what happened made us feel, and then how we're responding as a result. So although the stations, right, our map for our men's retreats and our women's retreats is identical, and the processes are very similar, some subtleties, right, between men and women, right, but the process is still the same. It becomes much less about whether it was military sexual assault, childhood neglect, combat stress, etc., and much more about the commonalities of how those events made us feel and how do we work through those. I will say that the folks that work in our female retreats, military sexual trauma or sexual assault in general, even with our spouses as well, again, it's not in my opinion, it's not a military problem. It is a societal problem. It's a cultural problem that I see in this country. And so it's really no surprise that the numbers of civilian population, match or could be exacerbated by the military culture, especially when, civilian culture, it's roughly 50-50, the gender population, where in the military, it's much different. It's more like probably 85-15, right? 15% of our service is female. So you can only imagine the disparity there causes certain issues, right? But nonetheless, I think the point is it's not so much what that happened to us. It's how those events made us feel, and then how are we choosing to respond to them then versus how we can choose to respond to them now.
Great. So important. So if you could bring one person to this conversation about trauma, about the warrior connection, about all of it, who would you want to talk with? And what would you say to them?
One person, huh?
Well, it doesn't have to be one.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's probably so many greats, right? I'm thinking like, geez, the Dalai Lama, or to sit with Jesus and talk about compassion and empathy. Holy cow, right? Let's start there. That would probably be enough. Like to have the Dalai Lama and Jesus in the same room at the same time.
There you go.
Would not only be humbling, but oh boy, the conversation between the two of them to just be a fly on the wall with. Wow.
Right. Yeah. Would you want to, I don't know, talk to like the Joint Chiefs of Staff or someone like that to educate a little bit more, or?
quite frankly, I'd want to go to the top. The Joint Chiefs all report to one person.
Mm.
And so, if I could sit with our president, no matter which administration or who's in office, I look at a guy like George Bush Jr., who obviously did not take office as a wartime president and was very quickly thrust into that stage. And of course, there's a lot of politics there between
Sure.
how and why we went to war as a result. But nonetheless, our country was attacked, right? And then now I look at the things that George and his wife are committed to now through George Bush Institute. My family and I are actually let's see, what's the date today? Today's the 26th. Okay, right. So I'm like 9 days away from moving my family to Texas, where the George Bush Institute just happens to be. I'm really excited for that. The reason being is since his time in office, that has been his number one focus. He recognizes the impact that his decisions, ultimately his decisions, informed by a bunch of yahoos, from the Wizard of Oz, right? All those men behind the curtain. But he recognizes the impact that his decisions have made, and he's really committed to raising money, connecting, building partnerships aside and separately from things like the VA or the DoD to really help. And so folks like that to me are inspiring. Often for a guy like me, who I'll say I view myself as an average Joe, there's probably a lot of people in my life that wouldn't agree with that. I know my wife particularly, and several others, right? It's kind of the old adage, right? A story your mother would appreciate and your dad just might believe, right? But I think of myself as an average Joe, and often it is rare to find leaders that are willing to listen to an average Joe.
Well, I normally close out by asking for people to share a book, a podcast, a movie, and a fourth thing of choice.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't seem a little too light and fluffy at this point in the conversation, can you share those with us?
Oh, sure. Well, okay. So a book, a movie, or podcast, and then something else, right? Okay. Let's see if I can get this.
Right.
So there's a couple of books, a couple of my favorites. I just got handed a book signed by the author here, Swift, Silent, Deadly. It's a story of reconnaissance Marines in Vietnam. So as a recon man myself, I'm really excited to read that one. I haven't read it yet, so I know Norman Vancour has probably put together a tremendous book, but it hasn't made my list yet, Norman. So
gotcha.
But right now, I would say a couple of my favorites. So one is a book called Work Rules by Laszlo Bock. Laszlo Bock was, I don't know, I think he was like employee number 20-ish at Google. And so his work rules is kind of like rules for how work works. And it's an amazing journey on how they built Google and how they intentionally created some of the human resource policies that they did from all angles. And so I really enjoyed that one. I like kind of nerdy stuff like that.
Awesome.
So that was a lot of fun. A related book to this topic, what we've been talking about today, is probably Sebastian Junger's Tribe and Vessel Bandelcook's The Body Keeps the Score. Tribe really speaks to small units and loyalty and that sense of belonging and why it's so essential to the human quest, well as The Body Keeps the Score speaks to the fact that, to my point earlier on that broken leg, our bodies, when the conditions are right, know how to heal themselves, right? So The Body Keeps the Score is really teaching us about how the body works and heals and a way to set those conditions. So those are a couple, but my favorite right now, I don't have it handy, darn it. My favorite book right now is called Warrior by a friend of mine, Shauna Springer, Doc, as we refer to her. And for the Marines and sailors, we refer to very passionately, very vehemently to our docs, because quite literally in combat, they're the ones who take care of us. But also not just in combat, but in those small units. Doc is the guy you go to for the aches, the pains, the injuries, etc., and often that moral support.
Sure.
So her book Warrior is really about how to support those that defended us, How do we help veterans? Right? That's her book. And she's definitely a subject matter expert as it relates to post-traumatic stress, military culture, and military sexual trauma. Absolutely one of the best that I have worked with in the field. I will tell you, her book Warrior is required reading for TWC facilitators, as well as our board of directors. All of our board obviously is committed to this work, and I'm oh so grateful for them to give in the ways that they do to this agency. And the book Warrior, because we have many of our board members aren't veterans, right? So they don't necessarily have the same nuanced understanding of what it is we're working towards and the desired outcomes as some of the other folks do. So Warrior is a great bridge. I highly recommend. Warrior is an excellent book. It's also on Audible. I just saw that the other day, that it's on Audible now too. Yeah. So there's books. That's probably a lot for books, but I'm kind of a nerd. I'm kind of a reader, so I appreciate that. But a podcast, I like a lot of, not all, but most of Joe Rogan's podcasts. He has got a great ability to just have a conversation, listen. He's informed. He's kind of a smart average Joe, if you will, I think, right? He's pretty informed on a lot of topics, or at least he's well prepped for his interviews, or both. So I enjoy his podcasts. I will admit, I do listen to Ben Shapiro's podcast fairly regularly as well. It's just some of his takes on things and the world and politics is interesting to me. So I listen to that fairly regularly. And a movie, well, I guess it's kind of related to what we've been talking about and post-traumatic stress and how we work through these things, and that facilitator versus mentor versus friend versus good society member. I think those stories are all told. So I got to give you two.
Okay.
So one is Good Will Hunting. So that's Matt Damon and Robin Williams. Boy, if that movie really doesn't personify a lot of the things we've been talking about, I've got a second one that does. And that is Bagger Vance.
Really?
Bagger Vance is a golf movie. And that is that also Matt Damon? Jeez, Matt Damon, you're crushing it today. So that's Matt Damon and Will Smith. So Will Smith plays his caddy, who helps guide him. And in that movie, our main character went off to war, came back with severe post-traumatic stress, and he completely checked out, dropped his relationship, removed from his role of society, won the Medal of Honor, and came home feeling like a fraud from World War. That would have been World War One. So great movies: Good Will Hunting and Bagger Vance. And then something else, a fourth of my choice. I'm going to go with this is I'll say it's part of my church, right? This is what brings me in alignment spiritually, is CrossFit. A good workout is great for the mind and body. It's amazing for my patience. I find that when I get good workouts, I am much more patient, both with myself and others. Challenging exercise, I think, is awesome for everyone. And I think, make no mistake, when you're exhausted and out of breath, it sucks, right? And when it sucks, that's when it's making us stronger. So when it sucks, I'm almost like, yeah, suck more. Make it harder, kick my butt. And for CrossFit, I think CrossFit often gets a bad rap for a lot of folks. You don't have to be an extreme athlete. You don't have to be young to do it. I am not young anymore here. As I approach my 46th birthday, I definitely am beginning to feel the years. But nonetheless, CrossFit is great for folks with any age, and for folks that may have had a bad experience or heard something negative about CrossFit, I would tell you, get a great coach. That's what makes the difference. A coach who will push you, but more importantly, a coach who recognizes your limits, right? There's the balance between the two. Because when you push past those barriers, there can be some growth, right? But if you push too far, too fast, right? That's oftentimes where I hear folks with CrossFit get a little overzealous and then they end up getting hurt, right? So get a really good coach. Anyone can do it. Get after it. If CrossFit's not your jam, find something else that kicks your butt, that sucks. Because when it sucks, You're getting stronger.
I love that. That's awesome. All right. So last question, and then I will let you go, and thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
But where can people find you if they want to help the Warrior Connection, or if they are seeking help, or both?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think first and foremost, our website's a great resource, and I'd appreciate you sharing that or putting that in the little thing there in the bar. But warriorconnection.org, you can find us on the web for sure. My contact information is there. My personal email is real easy. It's Aaron, AARON, at warriorconnection, all one word, .org. Aaron at warriorconnection.org. Send me a note if you want to help. Yep, go ahead.
Yep, sorry. The website is Warrior Connection, not the Warrior Connection.
Correct. The website is warriorconnection.org.
Got it.
And my email address is aaron at warriorconnection.org. If you want to help, if you need help, absolutely reach out. I'm happy to meet with all of our veterans, all the folks, all of our participants. I at some point will meet them myself, because I am that invested in each of our participants. But we've got great staff, from our coordinators to our mentors and our facilitators. Shouts out to all those folks. They do a tremendous job. And I'm so looking forward to just 3 weeks away from getting back to our programming. If you want to help the agency, more power to us. We need more folks that will help do more good. As I shared earlier in our chat, we're serving around 150 or so veterans a year and another 20, 25 military spouses. Well, our vision for future is to 10x that number again. So we went from serving a dozen or so folks a year to serving over 150 vets. We want to be serving 1,500 vets a year and another 250 spouses. I'll tell you, it ain't going to happen with just me. We need more folks like you that are willing to help the Warrior Connection share our story. But we need more folks in the community to get involved. We need more folks that are willing to contribute. I mean, we are a nonprofit. All of our revenue comes from individual donors and strategic partners. We take no federal money. The VA doesn't pay us. We'd love to untangle that ball of yarn, but while we're trying to figure that out, we still know that there's folks that need help. So
great. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your story and the Warrior Connection with us. This is amazing, incredibly important work that you do.
Well, listen, Shannon, thank you. And I'll tell you, especially around this time of year, we got Memorial Day coming right up here. So there's maybe a lot of talk or more talk and recognition of veterans and those that served. Of course, Memorial Day is about those that served and paid the ultimate price with their life in the course of their training. And that's not just those, or of course their service. That's not just those that died in combat. We're talking those that died in service and training. Hundreds of military members are killed in training accidents. It's a dangerous job, So there's a lot of folks that are affected there, and then that ripple right through those families that lost, through those communities that lost, through our society that lost. Absolutely. I think it's just vital that we continue to work together. And so, especially on things like Memorial Day or Veterans Day, where you may be encouraged to thank a veteran, at least for me, what I would say is, look, I signed up to do a job. You paid your taxes. Therefore, I got a paycheck to do what I signed up to do. The cool thing is, and at least my take on society, is that we each play a role. And this is really a key theme from that book, Warrior. We are all healers. If we're all doing it right in society, we're helping tend to the wounds of our children, tend to the wounds of our family, tend to the wounds of our church and community, right? So Shannon, by doing what you do and helping put this together today, this is serving your community. So it's really about us all doing our part. Our nation, as we shared earlier, 1% are veterans, are warriors, if you will, right? 1%. Well, that means the other 99% are school teachers, lawyers, accountants, medical professionals, et cetera, working at the grocery store to stock the shelves. Our country needs to get back to recognizing that all of those roles, those sum of those parts, are what make this country special. We got to get back to doing it right, and we are so much stronger together. But that takes effort, not just rhetoric.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
My pleasure, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much to Aaron Phillips for sharing his story and letting people know about the Warrior Connection. If you or a veteran you care about is struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder or military sexual trauma, please visit their website to learn more at warriorconnection.org. You can also visit the website to learn how to donate and get involved. Thanks for listening. I'm Shannon Perry, and this is the Audiotocracy Podcast. I'll see you next time.